All right, hello everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Stephanie Baskerville, and I am the content writer here at ProServe IT, and I'm going to be your webinar co-host today. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar entitled Windows Virtual Desktop Makes Remote Working for Nonprofits Easier. We've got a lot of great content for you, and it is my privilege to introduce the amazing people who are going to take us through it all. So on the line with us today is Bill Kastner, one of ProServe IT's amazing solutions architects. He specializes in Microsoft Azure. As Bill explains, Azure is like the Swiss Army knife of tool sets and products, and Bill enjoys the opportunity to provide customer education on the versatility and diversity of Azure. And joining Bill and I is Robert Dolney, who is the Cloud Solutions Architect with Microsoft Tech for Social Impact. Robert is skilled in many various areas, including technical support, agile methodologies, IT service management, Active Directory, and software development lifecycle as well. So welcome, Bill and Robert, and it's a pleasure to have you both with us today. And before we get started with the content of the webinar, folks, I'd just like to point out to everyone that there is a questions tab on your GoToWebinar platform. So if you have a question or two throughout the webinar, you can please feel free to utilize that tab, anytime you want to, and don't be shy on it. And we will make sure that we get those questions answered for you as soon as we can. So I think, we wanted to kind of introduce a potential way for nonprofit organizations who have switched over to remote working without sacrificing the productivity, connectivity, or collaboration piece that they need. So, for this, we wanted to introduce Windows Virtual Desktop, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill and Robert, the experts on the subject, if you will, and let them guide you through an introduction to Windows Virtual Desktop as a potential solution. So take it away, Bill and Robert.
That's great. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. So from an agenda perspective, we've already briefly gone over sort of an introduction of the speakers on the line today. We're going to walk through what Windows Virtual Desktop is, discuss the benefits of Windows Virtual Desktop for nonprofits. We are going to go through a bit of a live demo, and then we'll talk through next steps and some Q&A. So when we talk about desktop virtualization, or VDI as it's often referenced as, there's a number of different use cases that have historically been good candidates for desktop virtualization. If you find yourselves in a field where you have strict regulatory or security requirements, VDI can provide a secure and consistent end user experience in a secure fashion. If you find that you deal with, elastic workforce, so maybe you deal with, a number of seasonal workers that come on board, or you deal with, interacting with different agencies or mergers and acquisitions or things of that nature, any sort of workforce that has some fluidity to it, where we don't really have a good consistent user count throughout the year, is a good candidate here as well. As well as for organizations that have a number of BYOD devices or need to be able to provide, corporate desktops to remote users that might be coming across a number of different source platforms or different locations. Obviously, this is highly relevant now as we've, are faced a situation where we have a far greater number of remote desktop workers than many organizations really were prepared to be able to support. But this is obviously great timing to talk about a solution like this that can really help address that need to ensure that we're able to provide a consistent experience for end users and in a secure fashion, eliminating some of the risks that we've seen with other solutions in the past. When we've talked about desktop virtualization in the past, really there's been two different models available to us. The first is our Windows Server desktop experience. So this would be remote desktop services or terminal services, leveraging a server-based OS. It is, the benefits being that it allows us to run a multi-session environment, so we can stack multiple users on a given remote desktop server. But we do face some of the limitations associated with running a server-based OS as opposed to a desktop OS. So we don't get the same look and feel that we would with a traditional Windows client-based environments. But this has historically been, a great mechanism for providing a remote desktop experience. We're able to leverage Win32-based applications. When we look at Office, we're typically looking at an Office Perpetual license versus, Office Pro Plus that many of us use today for Office 365. And Windows Server typically adheres to a long-term servicing channel. So by that we mean, it's slower as far as releasing updates. You're typically getting a major release every couple years. with minor feature increases or updates over time, but it's typically a much slower update channel. The other option we've had is to run native Windows client-based desktops. So with Windows 10, we'd be able to take advantage of a modern Windows experience. We are able to take advantage of Win32 or UWP-based apps. We're able to take advantage of Office 365 Pro Plus with all the associated benefits with that. And we take advantage of a semi-annual channel. So with Windows 10 specifically, we get 2 updates per year that provide new features and functionality. The biggest limitation we've had with leveraging Windows 10 as our desktop in a VDI experience is that typically it's been single session. And this obviously causes issues when we look to scale. As in a single session model, if we're trying to support 100 users, we're typically looking at 100 Windows 10 desktops to support those. And everybody essentially has their own independent virtual desktop that they log into. With Windows Virtual Desktop or WVD, Microsoft has introduced the Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session model. And this really is the best of both worlds. We're able to take advantage of all of the features of Windows 10, so we still get our full-blown client experience. We're able to take advantage of both Win32 and UWP-based apps. We're able to take advantage of Office 365 Pro Plus, and we get that accelerated update channel, but we have the ability of leveraging multiple sessions. So we're now able to stack multiple users on a single Windows 10 experience. As mentioned, this really provides sort of a unified experience between the 2 solutions we've had in the past that gives us best of breed. So when we look at Windows Virtual Desktop benefits, there's a couple things that are worth noting. As highlighted in the last slide, we do now have the ability to run both single or multi-session Windows 10 experiences. And the environment has been optimized for Office 365 Pro Plus, which we'll dig into in a little bit. It does support Windows Server 2012 R2 or newer. So for those organizations that already have remote desktop services, there is a transition path available to you to start to leverage some of the Windows Virtual Desktop benefits. There is a great deal of flexibility in how we present information to users. So we have the ability to virtualize both desktops as well as individual applications. This is important, especially for those users who might not rely on a traditional desktop for day in and day out. Whether you use a mobile device, a tablet, or a desktop, Windows or Mac, whatever your flavor is, having that flexibility of being able to present, either for desktops or applications, based off of the form factor and the user requirements, provides a great deal of flexibility in how we present this information to clients. And lastly, we integrate with the security management features of Microsoft 365. So when we talk about optimizations for Office 365 Pro Plus, historically we have been able to run multiple instances of Office on a given OS. As we talked to with remote desktop services, we were able to install the perpetual license for Office, but there often have been challenges in running, those multiple instances and taking advantage of all the features that are available instead of Office Pro Plus or just the Office client experience. We now have the ability to leverage Office 365 containers to give us better performance in a multi-session environment. And this obviously includes things like Outlook and OneDrive for business, where we're now able to cache information for the clients in a much more elegant solution that allows us to provide a very positive end user experience in a quick fashion without having to rebuild profiles on the fly. This ability also allows us, because we do store all the profile information in containers, that we are able to provide a very quick and performant experience for non-persistent environments. This has historically been a challenge, typically for organizations that look to run things like Outlook in cached mode to provide a positive end user experience. The only way to really provide that has been in a persistent desktop experience where each user is able to log into their own individual desktop. They can then leverage all the cached information that Office has stored for them in order to ensure they have that positive end user experience. Now that we're able to leverage profile containers, we're able to provide that same end user experience in a non-persistent environment. And again, we will dig deeper into that. We are able to migrate existing Windows Server RDS desktops and apps to Windows Virtual Desktop. So for those organizations that might have made investments on-prem today with remote desktop services, provided you are running a 2012 R2 or newer environment, there is a migration path available to you to port your existing RDS environments into Windows Virtual Desktop. The benefit being you're now able to take advantage of the fact that the infrastructure is running in Azure. You have greater capacity for scaling, and you no longer have that hardware dependency that you need to manage as you would traditionally with an on-prem environment. And there's very strong application compatibility for existing Windows Server images that have been used on-prem. So again, to simplify that migration process, we're able to take existing images that we have, inject them into Windows Virtual Desktop, and allow organizations to get up and running quickly. Azure, as many of you are aware, has data centers around the world, which allows organizations to provide a positive end user experience for users no matter where they happen to be located, whether it's in your local region or abroad. With local Azure data center access, we can provide quick experience or quick connectivity to your Windows Virtual Desktop environment. Because this is an Azure solution, we're able to leverage Azure Management Portal to manage a number of the key elements around Windows Virtual Desktop, and we're able to take advantage of all of the security and compliance elements that are built both into Windows natively as well as Azure as a whole. So what makes Windows Virtual Desktop different from some of the other VDI solutions we've seen in the past? Really, the key benefit here is the fact that we're actually running on Azure. And what that means for organizations is a number of the underlying technologies required to make a solution like this successful are now being managed by Microsoft. So for those of you who might have dealt with other VDI solutions or even remote desktop services on-prem, many of you are familiar, we need to worry about things like load balancing and gateways and brokers, excuse me, and web access elements and such. In an Azure-based solution, all of those complexities go away, and they're provided to your Azure tenant by Microsoft. Similarly, when we look at compute, storage, and networking and all those underlying hardware elements that are typically involved in managing or building out a VDI infrastructure, all that again is managed by Microsoft, which frees us up to really focus in on the areas where we truly care about. And that's our published desktops and end user experience. So when you look at your subscription, you're really only managing your Windows 7 or Windows 10 desktop or your RDS environment through Windows Server 2012 R2 or Remote App. Things worth noting is that we do leverage Azure Active Directory identity management to manage access to your WVD or Windows Virtual Desktop environment. It does allow us to provide virtualization as a managed services. And we're able to deploy and manage these VMs inside of our Azure subscription. For those who don't have, that's obviously a requirement. This is an Azure-based solution, so we will need to build that out. You are able to take advantage of existing solutions. So if you are currently a configuration manager or Intune customer and have applications that you publish through either of those mechanisms, those are accessible to Windows Virtual Desktop client sessions as well. And then we have the ability to simply connect to on-prem resources. And that's a key element, is that even though this infrastructure is an Azure-based solution, there is no dependency to build out your entire environment in Azure. We are able to establish site-to-site connectivity back to your on-prem environment. And while users access that Windows Virtual Desktop session in Azure, you're still able to access all the same on-prem resources that they would historically been able to access. So when we look at licensing for Windows Virtual Desktop, many customers already have eligibility. So for those customers who have made investments in Microsoft 365, whether at the business level or at the enterprise level, or are leveraging Windows 10 Enterprise through a subscription model, you already have immediate entitlement to Windows Virtual Desktop. Similarly, on the server side, if you are a remote desktop services customer today and want to look at porting those instances to Azure, as long as you have your RDS Cal license with active software assurance, you're able to port that infrastructure to Azure and start to take immediate benefit of that. One of the nice things that that Azure brings to the table over a traditional on-prem environment is the fact that when infrastructure is not up and running, you're not paying for it. And so because Windows Virtual Desktop has a great degree of scalability built into it, we're able to build an environment, have it minimally viable when not in active use, which allows us to keep costs down substantially while still having that infrastructure there and available for when users actually need it. So there's a great deal of flexibility in how we actually manage those costings. Similarly, for those organizations that look to leverage Windows Virtual Desktop as a organization-wide solution or providing desktops over an extended period, there is the ability to take advantage of Azure reserved instances to help reduce costs substantially, which in combination with the ability to actually spin workloads down that aren't actively being used, can make an Azure-based solution quite cost-effective for many organizations. One of the key differentiators of Windows Virtual Desktop is the fact that they take advantage of FSLogix, which was a Microsoft acquisition. The FSLogix integration allows for a number of key benefits that really differentiates the solution from a number of competitive solutions. The first being profile container. So one of the nice things is we're historically in a virtual desktop environment or even in a remote desktop session. We have a couple of different ways in which we manage user profiles. Either we create a local user profile on the fly, or we rely on roaming profiles or things like folder redirection. And all those typically have various challenges associated with them. FSLogix allows us to leverage profile containers where all of our user data is actually stored on an external VHD that gets attached at login. And this is what allows us to take advantage of things like Office cache data, like Outlook OST files and OneDrive caching and things of that nature that ensures that users as they log in can be immediately productive. We also have the ability to take advantage of app masking. So for those organizations who leverage gold images and like to preload a number of different applications, rather than maintaining potentially a separate gold image for each department, many organizations look to load as many applications as they can on a given gold image, and then find ways of hiding or obfuscating those applications that aren't relevant to a user. App masking provides that same functionality, but in a more streamlined process, where it allows us to minimize the number of gold images that we have, install all the applications that might be relevant to a business, and then hide the applications that aren't relevant to a given user community or subset for the community. We also have Java redirection available, which leverages the app masking to allow us to present the right version of Java to a given application while hiding unused versions. So digging a little bit deeper into some of the benefits of WVD and the FSLogix integration. So Windows Virtual Desktop really relies on containerization. So we do leverage Windows VHD capabilities. There's no hypervisor required. It's very easy to deploy and manage this solution. It does provide a seamless end user experience. So even though we do maintain user profile information in a separate disk, it's integrated as part of the login process and becomes seamless to the user and to the applications. We're able to take advantage of other application management platforms that you might already have in place. And it's very easy to implement and to manage. And there's also technologies in place to help reduce network and file system load. As talked about, user profile information is stored in a network-based container that gets attached in login. And this does allow for extremely fast login times. For those of you who've logged into a workstation for the first time, there's typically time required to build that profile correctly for a user. And for those organizations that rely on caching, which is especially important when leveraging Office 365 to provide that positive end user experience, it can take a while to build that cached information up, versus leveraging an existing VHD that stores all of that user data. The moment a user logs in, all that information is there and immediately accessible to the user, which allows them to be productive pretty much instantaneously. Because we're storing that user profile information on a virtual disk versus network shares, we eliminate the likelihood of profile corruption, which has often been a challenge in the past. And as mentioned, we're able to take advantage of various user environment management platforms that you may already have in place. Office 365 cache data is really the critical component to ensuring that positive experience from a user perspective. Office 365 Pro Plus is designed to take advantage of the environment built around Windows Virtual Desktop. We're able to take advantage, as I mentioned, of Outlook OST files, OneDrive caching, Windows Search, all these capabilities that, as I mentioned, for those of you who are already on Office 365, recognize, local caching is what really provides that level of experience and responsiveness that end users are looking for. And that has historically been a challenge in VDI sessions, but it's been addressed here through this mechanism. Office applications have native performance and behavior. So by this meaning, even though applications might be stored outside of our image, even though our profile is stored separately from the actual virtual machine itself, we, from an application perspective and a user perspective, all of these integrate natively as part of the login process to provide a seamless experience. So Office applications immediately know who the user is, as all your profile information is available. It makes for that seamless experience that users look for and cuts down on administration requirements from an IT perspective. App masking we talked about briefly. So this is, again, one of those benefits of FSLogix. There are a couple different ways in which we can provide applications in Windows Virtual Desktop. So many organizations have those existing gold images that might have multiple different types of applications installed, which is where app masking comes into play. It does work with extended packages, things like plugins and font packages and things of that nature. And because applications are still installed normally in a VM, there's typically no issues with an application compatibility. Because these applications are treated the same as any other application that's installed locally would be, even though we're hiding some of those applications from end users, the changes that are made are invisible to the applications themselves. So we don't tend to have any issues in that regard. Really when we're looking to build out virtual desktop, typically the objective is to minimize the number of images that we need to be maintained. And this is a great mechanism to allow us to do that. Many organizations look to run departmental specific images or leverage other solutions. This allows us to provide sort of a single gold image to support those users. One item not noted here, but another mechanism that is available in Windows Virtual Desktop for application publishing is a new technology from Microsoft called App Attach. We don't get into that too deeply here, but App Attach basically allows you to package applications outside of the image and actually have them joined as part of that login experience. Again, this gets us away from having to maintain a wide range of applications baked into the image itself. Storing those applications outside of the image makes it far easier when we need to update versions of a given application, as we're updating just that one external repository with the new version of the application. And then as users log in, they immediately see the benefit or the new version of that application. And then lastly, we did talk about Java redirection. So this is important for many organizations that rely on different versions of Java. One of the challenges we see often with organizations is with Java, given the frequency in which Java is updated and the strict requirements a number of applications have to ensure that the right version of Java is being presented to that application can, as I said, often be a challenge. By leveraging app masking through FSLogix with Java redirection, we're able to install multiple versions of Java on a given desktop. We're able to associate the correct version of Java with each specific application. So as a user launches that given application, they're presented with the right version of Java to ensure that the application behaves with full functionality, and then all subsequent versions that aren't required at the moment are hidden. So with that, I'm going to pass the floor over to Robert, who's going to jump into a bit of a live demo around Windows Virtual Desktop. Robert?
Hey, thanks,
Stephanie. No
yep,
problem.
That's great. I'll just make you presenter here. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, great. So thanks everybody for joining me today. I've got my official Microsoft uniform on today, so I've got my hat on. I will go ahead and share my screen here with sort of a live demo of the Windows Virtual Desktop environment. If Stephanie or somebody can give me the go-ahead, make sure that it's sharing.
You are sharing.
All right, great. So a lot like what Bill said, I want to kind of start from the, let me see. There we go. Let's see, let's hide the control panel. Sorry about that. What I want to go through is kind of the end user experience and talk a little bit about what this looks like from your user's perspective, and talk through some of the pieces that Bill mentioned, such as the Azure Active Directory component, the platform as a service nature of Windows Virtual Desktop, and kind of make it real as we walk through some of these pieces. So first things first, I am on my local machine here, just my Windows desktop, and nothing special about this, very vanilla as it were. And at first, I'll start with the Windows client application. This is the primary application that most users are going to utilize when they do go through Windows Virtual Desktop, and we'll see a couple of different things as the user logs into the service. First thing we'll see is an Azure Active Directory authentication. So right here, this is familiar to anybody who's ever used Office or any Microsoft service in the past few years. We're just authenticating through Azure Active Directory. We'll know that we're doing that because we can see our Azure AD tenant here, along with the user that's assigned the access, or one of my test users. So any sort of control that you have here in the form of conditional access, multi-factor authentication, or any of those other pieces that you might have implemented for your Office workloads will be honored here. I don't have any of that. Unfortunately, I'm not that fancy, so I just, get the right username and password and I log in. And then from there, I'll see my applications. Right now, we're seeing just a number of remote apps. So like was said earlier, we have a combination of remote applications or desktops that we want to deploy to users. This user in question only has remote apps, and we'll take a quick look at what the experience looks like. Now again, Windows Virtual Desktop is not really changing what the end user experience looks like in some ways, but it's really simplifying sort of that back-end management of the service and simplifying the amount of deployment that you need to do to deliver this to your users. But as expected, we authenticate to the service, we log in, and then we have WordPad, and WordPad is working remotely. Doesn't really, not too exciting, but at least we can prove the point that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and we're being presented with just that application. I'll turn your attention. Let me see. I do have the RD Client app on my phone here, so let me open that up. I should be able to take then my phone and get a similar experience here just on my Android device. We do have an iOS client and an HTML5 client as well, which we'll get to. But if I were to say, take that same user, try to log in, and essentially it's going to have me log in again. I'll provide it my password that I don't want you all to see. And what we should see is my local box disconnect because I'm reconnecting to a different service. And then essentially what we do is we get that on my phone, and I can seamlessly hop from device to device wherever I may have that application installed or that connection installed. So we can use Android, we can use iOS, we can use Windows, we can use HTML5. So let's jump to the HTML5 experience a little bit. I do have another test user that has a slightly different level of access than my user number 3, but user number 2 has a couple of different types of resources. First of all, this user has the applications that the other user had, but they also have a full desktop collection. And what I'll do is try to open up a few different applications just to show the audience here how the HTML5 client differs a little bit from the desktop application. And this does come up quite often. A lot of groups want to use the HTML5 version, either because it's simpler from a deployment standpoint, it better enables bring your own device strategies, or just, whatever. There can be a lot of reasons why you would choose this over the client applications. And so similarly, I will select my remote app and I'm getting connected, my user session is getting authenticated, and I'm getting logged into the machine. So that will take a few minutes here, or hopefully a little bit faster while I get into WordPad. And then again, since this is user number 2, WordPad is working for user 2, and they have a completely different session running on that same box. However, like I said, we don't have just remote apps, we also have, well, and I should say, once one application is open, opening up subsequent applications should go much quicker as that user is already logged in and has an active session running. So I can continue to overload myself with all the applications I have access to. But going here to the actual desktop collection, and this is where you may implement a closer or truer to life desktop replacement service for your end users. And so this one represents a full desktop, and we can see here that this is in fact a Windows 10 box, just in the cloud, hosted in Azure instead. I might also mention my pool desktops or my remote app desktops are also running on that Windows 10 multi-session. So from a user's perspective, they are a lot closer to their expected environment than handing them Windows Server. Again, though, like Bill said, Windows Server is an option too, if that's your preferred environment for this. But I'm not going to dive too much into this. I mean, I think everybody's seen Windows 10 before. The only thing novel about this is that it's running in Azure versus running locally. So we walked through the client experience. We walked through some of what the mobile experience looks like, and also what the HTML5 experience looks like. Now, I'm imagining most people here today would consider them as the IT professionals, or otherwise a person who has to administrate this environment. And so I want to talk a little bit about the environment that's running behind the scenes here to show you really how simple the environment is compared to your traditional remote desktop services environment. As Bill said earlier, in traditional remote desktop services or Citrix or other deployments or other VDI solutions, there's a lot of components that go into that, and I typically think of it in two major buckets. I think of the public-facing infrastructure and I think of the private infrastructure. Public-facing infrastructure being services like gateways, broker services, websites to let users log in and discover their applications, and then everything else, which would be internal resources, such as a session hosts, file servers, domain controllers, in some cases a license server, but for the most part, we have those two separate buckets. And when we think about Windows Virtual Desktop, that first bucket, that public facing infrastructure bucket, really becomes a Microsoft 365 service. And for the most of it, it's hosted internally. So we'll notice here, for example, if we look at the URL or the domain for this, this is a Microsoft domain that users are connecting to. It is not something that you're deploying yourself, and essentially you're making those registrations to your private facing infrastructure through the WVD public facing Microsoft infrastructure. So to support this environment, I have a couple very simple things. I have a couple of personal desktops for my users. So these are individual desktops that are owned by one particular user. My user number 2 lives on this desktop number 1, for example. I have my pool desktop collection, which is where my remote apps live and how I'm giving users access to that. And then I've got a domain controller. One of the things that's rather interesting, or it's rather neat, I think it's neat, is that we've actually abstracted maybe some of the storage layer as well. Bill has talked about how the user profiling works in Windows Virtual Desktop and how we can store those basically like roaming profiles or profile containers, VHDs, in a separate storage location. Because as you can imagine, if I had more than one pool desktop, I'd have to download my Outlook archive every single time I hopped on a new virtual machine. The users would get very cranky very quick, and you'd hear about it very quick. And so in this environment, I'm actually doing something that's been more rather recently deployed in Azure. Is I'm using Azure Files as my profile storage repository. So if I were to say, look at an Azure storage account for this, I'm not using blob storage, I'm using the file service, and I can dive in there and I can look for my profiles, and I can see here that FSLogix is creating my profiles in Azure Files natively. And if I wanted to, I could go in here, I could see that these are VHDs for the users. I could, not that I would modify them from here, but I can ensure that the service is running as I expected, and I can otherwise hand out other file shares through Azure Files if I wanted to. This is really enabled through a new functionality that we have to storage accounts called just Azure Active Directory domain join. In the past, if you've dove into this before, this might have been a blocker for you in the past, but in these new modern times, we do have direct domain join functionality for storage accounts. And so we can see here that I am joined locally to my RAD WVD demo domain. And that is not a joke. My initials are RAD. I'm not trying to be funny and call everything rad. It's just the unfortunate nature of my name. But we have that domain joined. We can either enable or disable this, and then this ensures that those profiles stay or that storage account stays secure, and you can enable file and folder level ACLs across your data, whereas you couldn't before, where anybody would be an admin because they're joining via a storage account key. So that's neat, although you can do your own traditional file server if you'd like, or you can branch into something more robust like Azure NetApp files for super high performance file shares. But the point is I wanted to get as serverless as possible, and I was able to do so by removing that public infrastructure and that file share. One last thing before I give it back here is talking a little bit about the management. Those of you who might have already played around in Windows Virtual Desktop or have seen it may ask, okay, but where is the management experience? And the management experience is coming in our Windows Virtual Desktop v2 deployment of this in the Azure portal, where you will see a lot more features and functionality as far as the administrative administrative experience is concerned. For now, we have provided a management tool that you can grab on our GitHub. It's got a one-button click to deploy to Azure, which allows you to look at the Windows Virtual Desktop resources, manage user sessions, manage access, manage host pool creation, etc., and basically do the Windows Virtual Desktop administration through this tool. And so most everything here is mostly a wrapper around the PowerShell commands that we have in there, which is useful for those of us, myself included, who don't like to sit in a command line all day. I am a graphical person, so I do prefer this tool. However, if this doesn't quite hit the mark for you and it doesn't do that next level set of management tools that you want to be available to you, and you're impatient and you don't want to wait for Windows Virtual Desktop v2 to solve some of that, we do have software partner solutions who have made really turnkey solutions for management of Windows Virtual Desktop. Probably one of the premier ones out there right now is a developer called Nerdio. They essentially have a similar experience as our WVD management tool, except they kick it up to 11. They add a lot of image management, scalability management, and user management capabilities that our application or our management tool doesn't quite do today, and so they've really hit that next level of management before we get that V2 out. So again, because the dates of the V2 release are uncertain, and even in that case, it still is a good idea to evaluate all options out there. This is something that is highly recommended to dive into for that advanced management of that WVD console. But otherwise, that's all I got. And so all I really wanted to do today is do a quick overview of what the end user experience looks like, as well as a quick view of the management experience, and to show the audience here today a little bit of what it looks like. So thank you, and Bill, back to you.
That's great, Robert. Thanks so much. We just have a question here from James asking, when is V2 expected to be released? Do you know that yet, or are we able to answer that?
I can sort of answer it in saying that I don't really know. I'm not really close enough to the product group to say. The internal rumblings I've been hearing is that public preview is coming very soon, and so we should see a little bit more with public preview around the May timeframe, but the general availability is still up in the air. And so it is currently running through private preview, which means there are some customers in it. Unfortunately, there's no more openings for that service, and so I can't get anybody into private preview even if I wanted to. I myself would love to be in it, so I can't really play around with it myself, but we're looking at private or public preview within the coming weeks. I hope, again, like with everything else, COVID-19 has an impact upon development cycles and such, so that is not a guarantee. Don't hold me to it because I will not accept blame, but watch for it and watch the Azure blog, because as soon as it's available in public preview, we'd like for folks to get in on it. But don't let that stop you from investigating it now, because pretty much all the pieces are there. We're just making things easier as we go along. So it's still a good idea to investigate even in advance of some of those updates.
And then there's another question here from Mario asking, do we need to use Azure for Windows Virtual Desktop? If yes, are there Azure credits and expenses each month and things like that? Could we maybe actually, I might be jumping the gun here. Bill, are we going to be talking about that at all, or is that a question
we can talk about that now, absolutely.
Okay.
Am I still a presenter?
You are. I've moved it back to Bill, but I can make you presenter again.
I'll just talk about it. So Bill had covered sort of the licensing aspect, and as with all Microsoft stuff, there's always a licensing component, and then there's an Azure component. So because this is kind of the marriage between M365 services and Azure, those are really the two major pieces. So I'm not going to cover the licensing because it's already been covered, but the second piece is that Azure infrastructure costs. So just like any other Azure service, you are paying for the virtual machines, the storage, VPNs, egress, anything else that would be a part of Azure infrastructure. So in most cases, that is for Windows Virtual Desktop, it's going to be the virtual machines. Usually, though, the licensing is covered by M365 or Windows Server, whatever combination of services that you use. So it's a little bit cheaper than your run-of-the-mill Windows VM in Azure, because the licensing is taken care of, but you do pay for the compute, you do pay for the storage that you need, and then if you have needs for hybrid connectivity, say you have your applications in Azure, but you have your databases or your file servers on premises, you're going to need some form of networking in the form of like a VPN tunnel, maybe express route, or there's certainly going to be some network egress to consider there. And so those same pillars still come up. And so where Bill was talking a little bit about the scalability of the solution versus, traditional deployments, in Azure, you still build for your high watermark, kind of like you do on premises, except due to the nature of cloud, where services, compute resources are prorated by the second, you can achieve good cost efficiency by decommissioning or turning virtual machines off when you don't need them. And so you can have an environment that consists of 60 session hosts or more, or however many you need to fulfill your user requirements. But overnight, when users aren't online, or over the weekends when the need rolls down, you can turn many of those virtual machines off and go down to basically just one or two or whatever you need to just keep 24/7 operations running. And so while you do pay for compute resources, we really do rely on just the innate scalability of the Azure platform to help you control that cost, and then we can really work to minimize that infrastructure cost as much as possible in conjunction with making the most efficient licensing decisions to ensure that you're getting what you need out of that. So it's a little bit of A, a little bit of B, but yeah, Azure consumption-based resource like anything else.
And just to add to Robert's comments there before stepping into the next slide. So I'm assuming that most, if not all of you, are obviously nonprofits. That's what this webinar is geared towards. So we didn't say it explicitly, but this is an Azure-only solution. So there is no ability to deploy this outside of Azure. Being a nonprofit organization, you do have entitlement to Azure consumption. It's $3,500 a year of Azure consumption. That's USD or 5,000 Canadian. So if you are looking to build out an environment in Azure, through the software entitlement you have on the Office 365 side and the Azure consumption entitlement you have, that can definitely help offset a number of the potential costs for this continued running. Also, as Robert mentioned, when I talk about Windows Virtual Desktop, I typically liken it to a pilot-like mentality or methodology, right? Where it's very easy to scale this down to have a single host running, like Robert showed in his demo, to have pre-provisioned all the VMs that you may potentially need. So let's say you're, to have 100% of your workforce running in Windows Virtual Desktop, you need to have 50 Windows Virtual Desktop hosts in place. 49 of them can be turned off, and because they're not actually running, except when needed, you're not paying for consumption with them. You're only paying for that one server that's up and running. So that makes it very easy from a business continuity perspective to have the solution built out to have this available to users. So heaven forbid we find ourselves in a situation like this again down the road, where we do find our workforce needing to work remote. This is a great solution to have on a standby situation. If you're not using it as your full-blown desktop solution day in and day out, once this has been deployed, it's very easy to have this running in sort of a minimal state, or that's why I use that pilot light sort of analogy, where it's there, it's available. And as users start to log in, the infrastructure will scale itself up. There's a couple of different ways in which we scale, either through depth or breadth. So we can say, a one VM we know is going to support 10 users or 20 users, whatever that looks like. As CPU utilization on that one server hits 70%, we want to automatically spin up that second VM so that as users continue to come on board, that second VM makes itself available and ready. And then similarly, as Robert mentioned, we reach end of day or end of week. There's a draining philosophy available as well, so that we start to siphon users off of minimally used desktops, have them reallocate it back to sort of our first host, which allows us the ability to shut down those other hosts that aren't actively being used or not being used sufficiently. So there's great ways to sort of manage what your WVD infrastructure looks like to ensure you're minimizing costs, that you're only running the core infrastructure needed to support the given workload that you have at any point in time. So there's a great deal of flexibility in how you manage that. With that said, I'm going to jump back into the last couple slides, and then we'll step back into Q&A. So if Robert or I didn't answer all those answer the questions to your satisfaction, or you have some follow-up questions, we'll absolutely answer those in a couple minutes. So a couple of last things that we wanted to sort of highlight is first is that there is a partner ecosystem built around Windows Virtual Desktop. So there's a number of system integrators such available that are building solutions around Windows Virtual Desktop. Similarly, ISVs or value-added partners. So any of you who might have dealt with other virtualization solutions, so be it Citrix or VMware. Some of these vendors in that middle bucket are likely to be familiar to you, whether it's Thin Printer for printing or Liquidware Labs or Lakeside. Some of these solutions have been around for a number of years, supporting various other VDI solutions. All of them have been updated to support Windows Virtual Desktop. We also obviously talked about Nerdio. And again, for those organizations, I know one of the gentlemen or one of the people on the call asked sort of about that V2 of the management console. As Robert mentioned, we are hoping to see it in the next couple coming months as far as general availability. But if you are not comfortable with the native experience of the version 1 management console for Windows Virtual Desktop today, I'd highly recommend that you take a look at the Nerdio solution. It provides a lot of what that V2 functionality is going to look like, but is available today. You can get a free trial through the Azure portal, but it provides a ton of additional functionality to really simplify the ongoing management of your WVD environment. Lastly, we also have some WVD hardware partners for those looking at thin client solutions. Currently have IGEL and Samsung with more on the way. So for those who are looking at Windows Virtual Desktop, not just as sort of a pandemic solution or a business continuity solution, but are really looking at this to sort of replace traditional desktops and want to provide that full-blown experience with sort of a minimal footprint on the end user's desk. These hardware providers are a great source of those thin client models to provide that functionality. Any organizations that might have already deployed Citrix, provided you are leveraging the Citrix workspace, there is a hybrid mode available to you to take advantage of the existing investments you've made in Citrix, while also taking advantage of some of the features that are native to Windows Virtual Desktop. So specifically, the ability to leverage multi-session Windows 10 experience on Azure. Again, not something you can do natively in Citrix or the other solutions like VMware. But if you are a Citrix customer and already have that infrastructure deployed and have the license entitlements for Windows Virtual Desktop, you can take advantage of those multi-session Windows 10 desktops while still continuing to leverage that Citrix experience. Similarly, the benefits associated with FSLogix, so the profile containerization, app masking, things of that nature, all of those entitlements are available to you as well. So you can continue to leverage your investment in Citrix, but take advantage of some of the advanced features that WVD brings to the table. Similarly, for those organizations that might be leveraging VMware Horizon Cloud specifically, there's a number of benefits and integration points. So for those organizations that obviously want to leverage the investments that they've already made, might be partway through an existing licensing license cycle, and therefore need to recognize the value around those existing investments. There's no need to drop that solution to move to Windows Virtual Desktop. A lot of organizations are going to look to Windows Virtual Desktop as potentially a replacement over time. But if you want to start taking advantage of some of those Windows Virtual Desktop benefits on your existing solution, whether Citrix or VMware, it's available to you in either scenario. So last slide before we get into sort of Q&A is, there's a number of different use cases, I think, for Windows Virtual Desktop. This conversation would obviously be very different 2 months ago from it is now, as we have probably the most compelling use case available to us at the moment, which I'm sure is why a number of you are on the webinar today. But really, for organizations sort of, outside of our whole pandemic situation, for organizations that need the ability to either add or scale, add users or scale quickly, or want to provide a seamless, consistent end user experience that has a security layers associated with it, this is a fantastic solution. Speaking to the situation we find ourselves in now, many organizations are looking at alternate means to provide remote desktop functionality. I know a number of the customers that we deal with are either looking, many of them have deployed VPN solutions, but due to limitations on being able to purchase new hardware, VPN isn't always the ideal solution. And we have organizations that are extending VPN to end users who are leveraging personal PCs, which, while obviously gets you through the immediate hurdle of getting people productive, having personal PCs tied into your corporate network introduces a bunch of security risks. We typically can't validate the state of those client PCs before we allow them to connect like we would with a corporate device. So for those organizations that have concerns around those types of a scenario, Windows Virtual Desktop is a fantastic solution because it allows us to take advantage of those. Still, if people log into their personal PCs, but you're now able to publish a secure desktop that's controlled and managed by IT that meets your corporate requirements, ensures that antivirus is correct, that it's patched, that all the security requirements you have in place are there, along with the things Robert mentioned, things like conditional access and multi-factor authentication. We get a lot more flexibility in how we actually present our desktop or information to the users, and we get peace of mind from an IT perspective to ensure that it's actually a secure solution that meets our corporate standards. So with that being said, next steps. So again, a lot of information I think about Windows Virtual Desktop here. We didn't want to go too deep into this, but obviously can go far deeper for those who are interested in having further conversations. If Windows Virtual Desktop sounds like it might be of interest to you or your business, and you want to get a better understanding both of where you sit as from a readiness perspective, as well as what it would take to actually look to deploy Windows Virtual Desktop, either from a POC or a production perspective, please feel free to reach out to us at cloud@proserveit.com. Happy to have a conversation with any of you interested, and get as deep as we need to into the solution to allow you to make an informed decision on whether it's a good fit for your organization or not. And with that, I think we're going to pass over to Q&A. So we'll open the floor. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now.
We've had lots of questions coming in, yeah, actually. And I know Robert's been very busy typing away and answering a lot of those questions, which is wonderful. And thank you very much, Robert, for jumping in and doing that. I think there are a couple actually, though. Todd's been asking, can you log directly in the Windows desktop, or do you have to go to the app window first as demoed? And then I believe there was a follow-up question, which was, does that eliminate the need for a VPN to access Windows Virtual Desktop? So maybe we want to start with that question there.
So I'll take that one. So yes, you do have to log in twice, as you saw in the demo. The first login is to Azure Active Directory. The second login is to the local domain. And so it's a two-way street. The user has to be the same from Azure Active Directory to the domain. So if I were to say somehow log into Azure Active Directory as user number 3 and then try to log in locally as user number 2, it would say, hey, what are you trying to do? This isn't the same user. I'm not going to allow this connection. There is a roadmap for doing more of just the Azure AD piece and not requiring the domain piece or the local domain piece, but that's not the state today, and it is a longer term roadmap thing. So again, I can't comment too much on that because I don't know, but we would look to that as part of some sort of future update. The other piece to that, does that require the need for a VPN, or how does that work? So all these connections happen over port 443. These are not direct RDP connections to the virtual machines, and it actually uses a technology called reverse connect, in which the virtual machines themselves don't have open RDP on them. So if I were to look at the configuration of the VMs, there is no ports open on them at all, except any management ones that I might have opened just to access the environment to administrate it. And so it's completely handled through the reverse connect functionality of Windows Virtual Desktop, which secures the environment more so than you would see in a traditional environment. So no VPN, it is over port 443, so over the internet. But however, your Azure environment may still need a VPN to access any on-premises resources or workloads that remain local.
Gotcha. And we've got a question from Dan saying, would something like Power BI Desktop for Mac users work with this?
So I would imagine the question is, can we deploy this to Mac users, Power BI Desktop to Mac users? And I would imagine the answer is yes, because you would take the Power BI Desktop application, make it a remote app, or put it in a desktop, and then get the iOS client app, and then they could access it through that. So yeah, you should be able to do that, although I've not come within 100 feet of an Apple device, so I'm not super familiar with what that experience looks like.
I won't say I'm using one right now then. Sorry, it's not my choice, by the way. Anyway.
So that is one of the key benefits of the solution is it's allowing you to publish Windows application or Windows desktops to devices that would natively support it. So absolutely, if you're running a Mac, you can do your full published Windows desktop or published apps, as Robert mentioned. Same with, again, iOS or Android-based phones or tablets. It provides that same full, rich experience that you would get with a Windows PC, but on an alternative platform.
All right, we've got a question from James. He's asking, how is QoS managed for Teams calls video over RDS? Does this bring subpar Teams call or video experience? And should we be using a local desktop client instead?
Great question. So one of the nice features that Windows Virtual Desktop introduces is the ability to do audio video redirection for Teams. So you're right, so historically you would have a subpar experience when running a team session, either audio or video in a remote desktop session. You typically get a good amount of latency between your conversation and what actually gets replicated out through the VM. Through Windows Virtual Desktop and the audio video redirection, with Teams clients, your hosts or host PCs actually establish that point-to-point connection. So rather than your PC talking to your Windows Virtual Desktop session, routing up to Azure, off to the next person's desktop and back down again to their local PC, and that's where you get all those latency because of all the different hops. We do have the ability to enable audio video redirection so that your endpoints or desktops actually talk point-to-point. So you're still leveraging Teams inside of your Windows Virtual Desktop session, but you eliminate the vast majority of that lag because it's really an endpoint-to-endpoint connection rather than traversing the entire path. So this is one of those items that's unique to Windows Virtual Desktop. But again, where we sit today, where Teams has become such a critical component for many businesses, the ability to ensure that you have a positive audio video conference and user experience is imperative. And that's something that Windows Virtual Desktop absolutely allows you to do. So there isn't a requirement to leverage a local desktop client in this scenario.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just cognizant of the time here. I know that we are approaching the 3 o'clock hour. I know, Robert, that you did answer this question for James, but I think it might actually apply to a couple different people on the line, so I wanted to ask it as well. James is asking, what are the bandwidth requirements? We have some branches in remote locations with limited bandwidth, so maybe we can talk about that as our final question, and then we can wrap up the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to distill my answer, what I typed a little bit more is the RDP protocol is typically fairly low bandwidth. It's not like a YouTube feed or some video feed, and so typically it's already a fairly low bandwidth application or protocol. But to reduce that further is you can control essentially what sort of screen data is being sent back to the client, and there are different modes for low bandwidth environments where you can't really guarantee a certain amount of throughput, or you need to minimize that as much as possible. So definitely doesn't need to be a 4K video feed of a remote desktop, right? You can get a little bit lower with that, but again, because it's not over VPN, this would be considered something over an internet connection. So if there is a concern about the quality or the consistency of the connection, mobile networks, internet networks, or just anything else like that can also be in consideration for this. And so I think it opens up the options versus some sort of MPLS network that you might have had to use previously, or some WAN that you might have had previously. And so I think there's more options to help alleviate that. But yeah, just in general, RDP should be fairly low bandwidth in the first place, and that should help alleviate some of those concerns.
Wonderful, thanks for that clarification there. So folks, I do know we are a minute over time here, so I am going to just sort of close the questions and answers for now. But if you did have any further questions and you wanted to chat a little bit more about Windows Virtual Desktop, you can always email us at cloud@proservit.com, and we'll be more than happy to get those questions answered for you and to make sure that we can have that conversation with you as well. So with that, I am going to say a big thank you to Bill and to Robert, both of our speakers, for sharing your wisdom with us today. And I also want to thank all of you on the line for joining us for this webinar as well. At ProServe IT, we are well aware that these are trying times, and we want you to know that we are here to assist you however we can during these times. So please feel free, reach out if you need us. Again, cloud@proservit.com, and we can help you as best we can through this time, and we're all in it together. So that's what we want to make sure everybody knows. But with that, I'm going to say we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, folks, and be sure to stay safe out there. Stay safe out there, pardon me. And we will definitely be providing a follow-up with the recording to this video as well, so you can watch this on demand as well. So thanks so much, everybody, and have a great day. Talk to you later.